Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Adiogo. This is the second video in the Trello MVP series where we build a Trello MVP from scratch using React.js. Today, we'll talk about the features we will focus on for this MVP and we'll start building some of those features. You can see in the features list, there is creation and modification of tasks. There's creation of boards and modification of the order of the lists. And then there is creation of lists and authentication. These I feel are they're good enough to showcase what kind of project management system Trello is. And at some point you can decide, if you have some more time, you can add, uh, creating teams and probably adding deadlines to some of the tasks that you have. So you can see today we are going to work on setting up our project. We are going to implement a basic drag and drop. We are going to add global state management to our React app using Redux, and then we are going to persist our state locally. At the end of the day, we should have a Trello board that works. You can drag to any list, and also can drag the lists around. And when you refresh, the state is persisted. This is a very good sort of bare bones demonstration of the features and the powers of Trello. So let's go. Let's go into our code. Okay, so we run the create React app command that creates for us a new React project by the name Trello MVP. So we can enter the directory and run and start. And here we have our new React app. And so now I'm going to open the project in IntelliJ so that we can remove the things that we don't need from there and start coding our app proper. Okay, now we can see our new project. This is the README. Let's close that. So basically, this is the structure of a React app. There is the app.js, there is the index.js, which is the entry point for the application. We're just going to clean up some of this code. Alright. We're going to remove some of these CSS. Just going to remove this also, and we're just going to create. Let's call this clean slate. Right. Index.css. We delete that. Can also remove app.css. Can remove this also. Right. So now we are on a very nice and clean slate. Alright, clean slate. Next thing we'll do is to install our desired libraries. So we want to install React Beautiful DnD just to make our work a lot easier. Okay, so we can go ahead and start the server. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to define how our data will look, meaning the structure of our data for the system. So we want to, and that will go a long way in helping us visualize how we want to implement the solution to the problem, right? We want to, and what are the things we want to save, right? We want to save the tasks themselves and details about the tasks. We want to save details about the lists, right? And then we want to also save the order of both the lists and tasks in lists. Meaning we want to save each task and what it contains. We want to save the position it is located in each list, and we also want to save the position of each list in this board. To do that, we're going to create a file called, let's call it initial data, JSON file, and we are going to add our data structure. I'll just copy and paste what I have currently. Let's collapse everything. So first we have the boards. And what a board is essentially is a representation of this container and also holds some data about this list. So you can see here we have the ID of the board, we have the title of the board, which is this. We also have the list IDs, and the way they appear in this list also determines the order in which they appear on our UI, meaning you can see here features to do, in progress and done, features to do, in progress and done, which is sort of the initial data for us. So that's about boards. You can see lists. So lists essentially is just telling us what this ID maps to. This is the board ID, and if you open the list ID, this is the list ID. Features maps to a feature object here, and here we can see the title of the list. You can see the tasks that it contains and the order of those tasks. Same for the other lists that we have. Then we have tasks, and we have the task IDs and just the content and the ID for the task for now. So that's the structure of our data. Now to implement the drag and drop, we can first and foremost we need to add the drag and drop context from the React Beautiful DnD library. So essentially the context is the area that you want to enable drag and drop for. So for that, we're just going to import drag and drop from React Beautiful DnD. You can add it here. And essentially, there's a method we need to implement, onDragEnd. So can leave it empty for now. Right. And then the next thing, we're going to create a component called board to hold our board data. From the parent, meaning the ID of the board you're currently displaying, I am going to temporarily create a function called getBoard. Takes the ID and gives you back a board. And how does it give you back a board? It's going to import our initial data from, and it's going to say return initial data dot board ID. So we can say constant board equal to, so we've gotten our board object, and then we can use that to display the board title for now. So we can say board dot title, just to prove that we have the board itself. So we'll come here, instead of clean slate, we're just going to call board. So then we would need to pass the ID as props. We have board 1, just for now, can say ID board 1. So let's check again. You can see test board is showing. That means our board component is being rendered and it has the right data. That's good. So then we need to proceed to then render. Now we're rendering the board, which looks good. Now we want to render not just the board, we want to render these lists, the lists in the board. So what we'll do then is to say, hey, let's create another component. We'll call it list. It holds the ID of the list. And kind of a similar story to this. We create a utility function for now, get list, takes an ID, says list, returns, and then we can say get list. And after that, you can say list.title also. Right. So we have in the board here, we can just render list of, so we'll say board.lists.map. So list. And here we have a list. Right. So the ID maps to, essentially here, right, if you look at the structure of the data, each board has list IDs. So you can come to board, you have list IDs, you have here list ID, right. List ID, and then the key, since for React to know that it's the same element, so as to optimize, we can say list ID also. So let's leave this for now. So we can refresh. You can see you have test board, then you have the other boards, the other lists, the 4 lists that are in the board. I'm making good progress. Then I'm going to add a bit of CSS so that we can see properly demos lists. So since we're using start components for board, I'm just going to copy what I have here already. We have the container, we have the title, and then the list container. And so we wrap everything in a container instead of a div. And here, right, wrap these in a list container. Good. And our title, similar story, title. Right. So let us try again. Now you can see test board and some other changes there. There's a step I think I skipped. So let's go back. We're going to add a new library from Atlassian. And what it does for us is to add the CSS reset so that we start from scratch. Let's add a new yarn add. Okay, let's restart our server. And then we go to the very beginning, meaning index.js. So we go to index.js. Let's close these instances. And then index.js, we want to import that CSS override. And now if we refresh, our CSS looks much different now. So, okay, we can then go ahead and add some styling for the lists. So go to list.js. Insert component, just define the component, the container, the title, and the task list. And very similar to what we've done before, we overwrite this and add container. Instead of title here, you wrap it in title. And for our task list, very similar to what we had before. This would be for a task. We don't have any yet, but we can see, if you see, our styling looks much more, much closer to what we have here. So now our next step is to render the tasks. So create a new task component. Also takes an ID. Same steps with this. We go from task, initial details of task, say get task, also a task. And exactly let's add our styling now. So let's just add container. Alright. I would say container the task does content. As you can see in the data structure, task.content. So let's start it in. We need to add it in our list. Sorry. So we have list, those tasks IDs, I believe, that map. Task ID gives you task. You can say key, task ID, and the ID task ID. Let's confirm that list has task IDs. Yes, we're good to go. So we need to import task. Boom, nice. So you can see we have the basic features nailed down. We have our list rendered as it should. Now next step is for us to add, to be able to drag in between lists. So we need to add an area. We need to tell the library right here in this area is where we want to be able to drop whatever we're dragging. We want to be able to drop here, and not outside, but inside this list. So to do that, you can see this is the title. We don't want to drop around title, we want to drop inside here. So for that, we just need to wrap this with our droppable. So we'd say droppable, move this inside, and then we add a droppable ID. Just our ID, and then we say, hey, the droppable expects you to pass a function as a child, and doesn't expect you to just use them as props as children. So I would say it expects you to pass a function, and then that function is going to be passed some input parameters. So the one that we are going to be working with for now is provided. So provided gives you the inner ref, the ref to assign to your child. And provided also gives you some props that is needed to make it the droppable. Droppable props. Good. Okay. So while we have that, we've set up our droppable to work. Then we'll need to go to our task and set it up as a draggable. This is droppable, we are dragging this as a draggable. So here in our task, we're going to wrap it, wrap this container with draggable. And just the same thing that we have the draggable ID, and then we'll say, hey, we would also want to pass it the index, meaning what order are you in the list. So that means we need to pass another prop here. We'll pass it later. Let's complete the setup. So we have container working, but then we need to also the same thing. We can't just pass it as it is, we need to pass it as a function. So we'll say, hey, provided, and returns this. So what does this mean? We need 3 children, essentially. The ref, which is provided in our ref, the draggable props, and the drag handle props, meaning what part of this element will control the dragging, meaning an example would be if I wanted to only be able to drag the text itself and not to be able to drag the empty space, I would add the draggable on the text and limit that, right? If the text doesn't spread here, or if there is an icon that I want to just drag instead of the whole place. And you can see already drag and drop is working just based on what we've already done, even without passing the index. But you can see it reverts to the original state it had, original order. Even though we can drag here, it goes back. So what we want to do first and foremost is to go to where, come here and pass the index. So here we can get our index as the second argument of the map function. So we can say, alright, that's good. So now we're passing our index. Okay, this is good. Yes, can close our task. Now we want to persist, meaning when I drag this and I drop this here, right, the order should change. Meaning Redux setup should become the second item, and this should become the third. For now, because we are passing, if you look at our list is made up of static elements, meaning task ID is not updated at all. So we would have a problem even if you drag and drop, So for that to happen, so as not to waste our time configuring an intermediate system, I'm just going to implement the Redux now, set it up now, so that just keeps the state of everything instead of using the JSON file. And how to do that? We're going to install the Redux library. Yeah, I think that's all. So while that is installing, we'll need to create a new folder. Can call that can call that Redux. And here we'll also need to create a new file called store or Redux store. And for now, basically for what we are doing, we need to also create the actions and the reducers for Redux. If this is your first exposure to Redux, it might be a bit confusing. I think you would need to look into some articles about it, but I'll try my best to explain how it works or what I'm doing and why I'm doing them. So, first and foremost, I'm going to create the reducers. So we would have the list reducer. Essentially, you can think about it like the list state or the list, keeping the global state of the list. So name that list slice. I'm calling it slice for a different reason, but it's going to export the reducer itself. I'm calling it slice because it's being used here. And so first I'm going to what do we want to do? We want to create. So first we would be, so I would say we use the create slides function from the Redux toolkit, and that makes our job a lot easier. We don't need to create special functions, special files, also track the type of the function or things like that. We are just going to use this quick help for us, and then we're going to create two methods for it, two functions. We want to remove tasks from list, and then we want to add tasks to list at a particular position. So to explain, I believe these two functions, I think they're quite explanatory enough. We want to remove tasks from a list, and then we want to add tasks to a list at a particular position. Initial state is sort of what you start with in the Redux. It's keeping state for you. Essentially, that's what Redux is, keeping a global state. And we're saying, hey, for the list, right, for the list item, this particular property, start with this data. So I'm just going to point to our initial data.json, and I'm going to say start with this. So let's go to our list slide. Let's import initial data. Go out and then get in. So that's good. And then you can see here, this is the name of the reducer, or the name of the slice. This is the initial state, and then these are the reducers that we have, right? You're saying, and then these methods that we've defined here, we are just calling them here, meaning remove tasks from list gets two things. We're going to, from here you can see action.payload, meaning the payload for the action. When we call the action, the things we are passing into it. We are going to be passing a function that looks something similar to this. The index of the task ID, right? And then the list we are dealing with. So based on these two things, you can see if I give you the index of the task, right? Let's say index here is 1, and then I give you the ID of the list, meaning features. You can easily use splice. To remove an item from there. Right. That's the logic of it, right? Same thing with add test to listed position. I need to specify the position I want to insert, because sometimes someone drags, they drag here, they drag here, they drag here, doesn't matter. So I'm passing that detail also, meaning the task ID, the new task index, and then the ID of this new list that I'm adding to. Those are the two important functions for us. So with these two, we are going to be calling them almost simultaneously, meaning when I drag and I drop here, for example, if I drag this guy and I drop it here, I want to remove it from the features list, and then I want to add it to the to-do list. Those actions need to be performed kind of one after the other. And it doesn't even matter if I'm making the changes in the same list, meaning if I am going from here to here. Essentially, you can, it's safe in a sense to call it even if it's the same list. It's the same list because I can remove from here, remove from the list, and then just add it here. And it would work seamlessly as if it was a different list. So those two wouldn't matter. So I am going to, the function works. Now we are exporting the reducer as I said. So this is a slice, but what we are exporting out of it is the reducer. So we are going to go to the store. We are going to import that reducer and use it. So we have another function method from our toolkit, configure store. And then we also have, so for the configure store, we can say constant. So configure store, and we can pass some options. Our first option is reducer. We're saying lists, and then we're saying lists. List reducer. Because if you go up, you can import, say, our list from this slice. Can create, let's move this into its own directory. Alright, nice. So it's isolated. So this is store. So this is list reducer. And then we can export that. Good. So this is our store. Next part is for us to use it in our index.js. We're just going to wrap the app with the provider. So we say here, provider, ask for a store, we give it. So store, we import our store as you've seen that we've created it. So we can say store from Redux store. Good. So we have our store wired. You can see that's basically the setup for it. We can reload this to make sure, okay, we haven't started. Let's start it. Just to make sure nothing is broken. Okay, everything is working well. So then we can say Everything's working well, yeah. Things are still the way they are. So now you see this function that we implemented on drag end. This is a function that gets called when a draggable is dropped, meaning the drag action is completed. So we can log that and let's see what the structure is like. Let's put it to the right. Let's expand this a bit. Console. Loaded this. Let's drag here. And we can see droppable to do could not be found. Okay, I found the problem. We forgot to add the placeholder for the provider. It's part of the setup for Beautiful DnD. Just after we're good. So let's restart. Let's drag this. Yeah, now we can investigate. You can see we are logging here, meaning onDragEnd. You can see when we, for example, let's drag from to do to in progress. If we expand it, you can see there is a source to do. We dragged project setup, I believe, yeah. We dragged it from to do. It says the initial index, which is at the position 0 from to do, and goes to this destination in progress to position 0. If we do the same thing for Redux setup, you can see it goes from source index 2 to index 0. You could ask, what happens if I drag outside of it? Here, right, you would see destination is null, meaning if you drag out of the droppables you've defined, it's going to give you null. So let's write some code to care for that. So we're going to say, hey, if the destination is null, right, first let's deconstruct those properties. We have source, destination, we have the, you can see the draggable ID, then we also have, yeah, let's stop there, then we can say results. So this helps us to identify the task ID we are dragging. This helps us to identify where it's going, and this is the source. As I said, we're going to say if it's dragged outside of where we expect it to be, it's going to give us null. So we're going to return that. Then another check we want to do is to say, hey, if you're dragging from the same, meaning if you're dragging, if we drag, and we return to the same position, we don't want to do anything essentially. We just want to, want to pause and look at you like that, and just do nothing. So we say, okay, if definition dot droppable ID. So I think, if it's the same as source dot droppable ID, and another check. This checks if it's moved in the same list. But we also want to check if the indexes are the same, meaning if the destination dot index is the same as the source dot index. If that is the same, so we also return. And we stop the function there. If those two are the same, all we want to do is to change update global state, which is a good idea. So to update global state, as we're using Redux, we want to update global state. How do you do that? You are going to dispatch an action in Redux terms. You're going to tell these are two actions that we've defined. It's just like saying, hey, instead of actually making this state of updating, instead of directly updating the state by yourself in Redux, you're just going to call an action that instead does that for you. So that action, you just call this, and the action gets past the state at the point at which the action is called, and the details, whatever details you passed with the action. So let's see how we use it in this case. We're going to say, hey, get a dispatcher, kind of. You think about like a dispatcher that dispatches an action. We use the hook, use dispatch, and then we say, hey, right, dispatch something for me. First, what do you want it to dispatch for you? You can say remove task from list, which is the action that we had. But then we can see you need to pass some things to it. So we say, hey, I want to pass the list ID, which is from which list do you want it to remove something, which is from the source.droppable ID. Second, we have what is the index that you want to remove that thing for. In this sense, you don't particularly care about what you want to remove. You're just saying, go into this list, find this item at this index, and splice it away from there. So I'm just going to say task ID index, as we have in the right here. And you're just going to say, okay, source.index. Yeah. So you can test that alone, just that alone. You can see if I remove this, wait, this list is also still pulling from the static. Okay, let's update our list. Why this didn't change was because we are currently, if you check our list, the list get list is getting from initial data. We need it to get from Redux. So how do you do that? You're going to use a use selector. So we say, hey, use selector from React Redux, and we're going to say, hey, it gets past the state. I will say, hey, state.list ID, essentially. Okay. By the React rule, we can't call the hooks in that kind of function. It has to call it. It should work. Right. So we have, hey, go to state, and this state is a Redux state. We're going to get the lists, and then we'll find the ID, double list. And you'd see now it's working well. And then we can test the theory that we had here, right? We're dispatching the removal of a task from a list. Does it get removed? Meaning, if I come here, only that removal function gets called. If I move this a bit, even if I move it and I leave it here, because we said here, if I move it in the same position, return, nothing happens. If I move it out, nothing happens. But if I move it to any other one, something happens. I move this here, something happens. Creation of list. Nice. If we reload, everything should come back since there is no persistent. So what we've done is to just dispatch the removal from the list. Now we need to dispatch something, right? Add task to list at a position. And what are we expecting? We're expecting the task ID and the list ID. So let's check that. It's called task ID. Task ID is the draggable ID, meaning what are you dragging? I'm dragging a task. And the last part is that you want to also get the new task index, meaning where is it now? So we say new task index is destination. Here, use destination dot index. So these two, this removes and this adds, kind of, yin yang. So if we drag this here, we can drag this here, it stays there. Drag this here, drag this here. Makes it beautiful. Yeah. So we can take a sip of water. Yeah. So the next step for us, so what we have is that if we come here, all right, we can do this. So project setup is done. Basic drag and drop is also kind of done. We've completed this. Now the last part for us, I believe, is to now allow us to not just drag these guys, right? We want to drag the lists themselves. A bit tricky, but it's kind of also this as simple as what we're currently doing. So we are saying, hey, I don't want to drag this droppable that I have declared. I also want to be able to drag it. Which is the same thing as what we did here of saying, hey, define this as a draggable. For the task, sorry, we define this as a draggable, and then we'll say, hey, this is a droppable. So here we'd also say, hey, you're a draggable, you're the droppable. Very straightforward. So we can say, let's define this as droppable. We can move this and say droppable, right? And it takes the provided, right? And then we need to set a bunch of stuff like that, the inner ref. So can come to this, right? And just look at, there's a droppable ID. Sorry, droppable ID. And here you would also need to add, I think I wouldn't make that mistake, this provided ref. No, did here, no, inside the drop. Let's add it here. And then, well, this is good. We need to add those props. So we have the ref and then the droppable props. Okay, so those are the things we have. Now, what else do we need? We need to say, let's just go. Let's make the mistake together. So now we can go to the list and then wrap it as a draggable, meaning we want to drag all these. Right? That means we need to wrap this container. Also draggable. And then we need to also, instead of passing it as props to children, we need to pass it to the function. We'll say provided. And then we'll do the other stuff. We insert this draggable ID. And then the index and then the key. I think the keys are important here since we are here. So we have index here also, meaning from the board we need to pass the index. So I'd say we have our list working well. Provided, sorry. So we need to pass the inner ref and things like that. So let's just copy and paste what we have. Boom. Okay, so it should work, kind of, but let's reload this. Now let's try to move it. You can see it's working vertically, which is not what we want. And we also have a crash when also have some errors when we drop it, meaning onDragEnd. When this gets invoked, we have some errors there. So first, let's fix this. We can, the beautiful, React Beautiful Drag DnD provides us with a way to specify that, hey, I don't want to drag vertically, I want to drag horizontally. You just have to come to droppable and say direction horizontal. Let's load that. Now you can see. Looks good. Okay, so while that's working, you notice we're having a clash of the two droppables, meaning this droppable and the tasks droppable. Sorry, this droppable and the list droppable, they're kind of working weird. So a way to specify and to limit that how they interact is to add the type parameter on the droppable. For example, for this list, the type that we expect to be dropped on it, right, is the task. So whenever something is dropped on the task, you can say if this is task, then work this way. If it's not task, then work the other way. So let's do the same thing for board. So we come to board and we say, hey, type is list, meaning the type we expect to be dropping here is list. So what I'll do for the moment is I am going to comment this out, and then we are going to just log results. Let's notice that type parameter there and work accordingly. So when we drag this, you can see there is no clash of items again. Let's see. So you can see that we have type of list. When we drag this guy, you can see that we have type of task. So what that does is for us to, instead of having these commented out causing crashes, we can say if add type here, have a deconstruction, if type is task, then do this. While this is not working, this should work. All right, that's beautiful, very good. Then we would say something similar, but for list. If type is list, invoke some other actions. We don't have the actions yet, so that is where we are going to focus our effort now. So I'm going to create a new slice. I'll call it board slice. And the content is kind of similar to what we have currently. So we have creating slice. We create slice. Then we have a function, word reducer. You can compare it to the list slice. Right. Very, very identical. Here we have the name boards list, and then here we also have boards initial data. This is initial data, meaning we are getting from here. And then we have reducers. Here we're using one function because for the list, all we do is move around, right, in one whole board. We don't have a case where you're going between boards, so you're just inside one board. So the name is move list to position in board. And what do you need? You need the list ID, you need the previous index, you need the new index, and then you need the ID of the board. And this line is getting the IDs of the list for this board, which is in state. And after that, this splice is removing, meaning this first task, we're removing, and then we're adding to the new position, which is the second task. And then we update our state. which is very identical, processes for both of them. Very, very identical. So we are going to go to our store and just add this reducer. We're going to name it boards. Board. Okay, now this is good. We can now go to app.js and say, hey, if it is list, just dispatch something different. Dispatch move. And we're going to add those items. We have the list ID. You have the previous, new, and board ID. So I'm going to add board ID, new, and previous. Okay, that's good. List ID means the list we're working with, that is the draggable. The previous, that's going to be source dot index. Essentially, because the source is the same as the destination, it's just syntax at this point. And then the board ID could be the source of destination. I just use destination. So these should work. State board ID is undefined. So let us see what we have. State board ID. Do I need to restart the server? So let's first update our board from the state first and see if we still have the problem there. So we say, hey, constant board is going to be gotten from. So give me a moment. So we say use selector, our hook from Redux. So boards ID is right. So we can then call and refresh, and move between boards. We still have problem with state.boards. Okay, so I can see our problem here. Here is in the board ID, instead of, and I hope you guys saw it, you were shouting at me, hopefully. So here, right, instead of board ID, instead of passing the actual ID, here I just pass destination. So here I just need to say droppable ID. And that should be good enough. We have to do, done in progress, features. And we are almost done. So we have project setup done. We can implement this Basic DnD done already. Now this is the last part for us. Local persistence, meaning when you refresh, it shouldn't just scatter again. And let's clean up our code. Let's remove what we are not using. We are not using this from here again. Right. Okay, task is still from here. Doesn't really matter. If you want, you can create a task slice to hold, the state for task. But because we are not updating the tasks themselves, right? We are not updating this node. Right? That's why it's not a big deal to have it here. Okay. So one more thing that you notice here, you can see the background color. It's lime green and white. And it's saying if the props.isDragEnd is true, change to lime green, meaning what that style is there for is when I'm dragging, all right, turn the card to light green. So here you can say dragging equals to, and use, there's a snapshot as provided as the second parameter for this library, and use this dragging, I believe. And we can check, and boom, yeah, looks good. Very close to the demo we had at the beginning. Now we just need to persist. And to persist for now, instead of persisting on a server, we'll just persist in our local storage. So let's create local storage to just those functions, and we'll see we have two functions, load state and save state, essentially. Right. Just want to, so we'll go to our store and would say, hey, add a listener. I want to subscribe. I want to say, whenever anything happens in our state, once our app grows, it might seem like an expensive call. Yeah. We were saying, we're just, maybe not so expensive. We're saying, whenever anything happens, right, call save state. And save store, save the current state of the store, meaning we are saving to our local storage. And then whenever we restart the application, we want to add preloaded state. Load. Yeah, these are the two things you're saying. Whenever you're loading the application, load from this guy. And secondly, you're saying whenever anything changes in our state, store in local storage. So now we can just restart, can move this around, you can see, yeah, very consistent. Yeah, I hope with this you were able to learn some things about React, about how to do the drag and drop. The next lessons we are going to focus on adding more styling, adding a way to create the tasks, and probably moving the tasks also into Redux for the state management, and then probably also how to edit, how to edit a task and things like that. Then we'll probably then move into authentication, authorization with Firebase. Yeah, that's a teaser for you, which comes in handy when you want to just quickly bootstrap something and get on. Yeah. For those guys that are still here at this particular point, that stayed to the end of the tutorial, you can leave me a comment. You can, if you have tutorials you're thinking about that you want me to make, if you have things you want me to talk about, write me in the comments, and from time to time I will answer. I'll make sure to engage you guys there. Have a nice day. Thanks for watching.